The way I like to introduce it is that we usually try to discuss and work together on challenging topics and hear and work with different and diverse perspectives. So in the center, I'm an economist, but we work with people in law and business, but also in engineering and in health. So it's really this idea to have a diversity of views. And when the Australian Parliament decided to have this referendum, I started to talk to a couple of my colleagues, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues, but also what you may call mainstream Australians, and everybody said it would be really good to have a good debate. And then you look at a lot of the events, and either they are pro or against, and even though a lot of people say we would like to get people talking about this and actually learn about what may work or may not work, another best theme, I thought, why don't we organize a debate? And I was very lucky to have our Deputy Vice Chancellor for Indigenous Australia, Angela Leach, encouraging me to have this type of discussions. I met Karina, who volunteered to moderate tonight. And here we go. I can tell you Sky News was very keen to hear what happens here tonight. So we definitely got some interest in the debate. I really look forward to the next hour and a half or so. We will have a reception afterwards out there. You can hear maybe from my croaky voice, I have a little bit of a cold. I keep my distance. So I will actually disappear and watch from a screen more, that I'm otherwise worried that I interrupt the debate more. Thank you very much for coming. I would like to start with an acknowledgement of country and QUT. Does a very nice job with this video, and then I hand over to Karina to introduce herself and the panel, and we go from there. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, and I really look forward to the next 90 minutes or so. Just one question at the end of the whole event. We will show you a QR code and ask you a couple of questions about the debate, and please have your say there. We will share the results as well with you after the event out there. Thank you.
Bulka be Bulka, welcome in the language of the Yagara people. We acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara peoples as the First Nation owners of the lands of where QUT now stands. For thousands of years, the Turrbal and Yagara people have gathered along the banks of Maiwa, the Brisbane River, to share their knowledge and stories. We pay our respects to their elders, laws, customs, and creation spirits. We recognize that these lands where QUT now stands have always been places of teaching, researching, and learning. We acknowledge the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within our QUT community. From Moreton Bay, inland as far as the Great Dividing Range near Warwick and Toowoomba, as far north as the Caboolture River, including the lands around Brisbane City, Meanjin. Yura yura yunala, Bulka be Bulka, Nanguru Muru Maramakura Manya Birali, Manya Bayam. Welcome to the traditional country of the Turrbal and Yagara people.
A big thank you to QUT for that wonderful video, and to, I believe that was Shannon Ruskers speaking, and Uncle Chegg, who was the former elder in residence here at QUT. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we are standing on, the Yagara and Turrbal people, and also acknowledge UVA for putting on this event, and also the Pro Vice Chancellor for Indigenous Australians, Angela Leach, who also joins us here today. Thank you for joining us at this BEST debate, hosted by the Centre for Behavioural Economics, Society and Technology. We gathered here today to explore the intricacies of a subject that I imagine we have all heard quite a bit about. I know that I certainly have. That is the Voice to Parliament referendum. My name is Karina Hogan. I am honoured to be here as your facilitator or moderator for this discussion. I'm an experienced non-executive director, broadcaster and producer. Throughout my career, I've had the privilege of serving as a conduit for dialogue, ensuring that diverse voices are heard and essential conversations are to be had. So when I decided to be part of this debate, that's what I went in as that's the intention that I came in with. I believe it's going to be a robust and varied conversation here today, and I really am looking forward to hearing from you guys. We're also joined online by a number of people, so I acknowledge you as well. And later on in the discussion, you will all have the opportunity to ask questions and be part of this conversation. Please don't be afraid. There's no silly question. This is about opening up a dialogue and really getting to the crux of it. The debate is about to happen on the 14th of October. That's not far away at all. And there are lots of questions. I know, as a proud Aboriginal and South Sea Islander woman, I often every day get questions about this, to which my response is, take the time to get to know and to understand for yourself and to position yourself in the argument. So today, hopefully you guys will be able to pull some stuff from this debate and be able to make your own minds up on the 14th of October this year. And as mentioned before, Uwe mentioned the QR codes. So they'll come up on the screen very shortly. Make sure you take a photo of that. That will take you to Menti, which I imagine some of you would have heard of, particularly those that are from a university. But there are going to be 3 questions in there for you guys to answer. And that is, based on the debate presented, would the Voice be a positive way forward for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples? Number 2, based on the debate presented, would the Voice be a positive way forward for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and all Australians? And then number 3, in the upcoming 2023 referendum, do you intend to vote yes or no on the Voice to Parliament? I will say, as the facilitator and moderator, that my being part of this panel does not indicate what I believe yes or no to be. I've not disclosed what my thoughts are on the topic. As a journalist, I have remained neutral, and I will do so till the end. And also, this is not about me. This is about you guys and being able to put that mirror up against yourselves and to be able to ask yourselves, what do you think we need to do as a country moving forward? And so without further ado, I'd love to introduce our amazing panellists that we've got here today. And I'll start with Jess Conlon. Jess is an Queensland University of Technology alumni, graduating in 2015 with a Bachelor of Laws and completing PLT, which stands for Practical Legal Training, in the same year. She holds a dual Masters of International Relations and IR from the University of Queensland, and Jess is currently practicing as a commercial lawyer. Bo Spirim is a Kumar Murrawari and Gamilaroi podcaster and activist, born in Western Sydney and raised on the south side of Brisbane. Bo has been involved in community radio since 2012, and in 2017 he began Let's Talk, a talkback program that discusses issues affecting First Nations people. Additionally, Bo hosts a podcast called Frontier War Stories, which you can find online. And he's dedicated to truth-telling about a side of Australia often omitted from the history books. Selwyn Button is a partner of both PwC and PwC Indigenous Consulting, chairperson of the Lowitja Institute, and serves on various boards, including the Australian Children's Education and Care Quality Authority, the Institute for Urban Indigenous Health, and Queensland Rugby. A Goongarrie man from southwest Queensland, Selwyn has led policy, service delivery, legislative reforms to support the outcomes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And then last but not least, Devitt Kennedy, nee O'Brien. Devitt is the lead organiser for the Queensland Community Alliance. Devitt previously served as the Secretary General of the International Young Catholic Students Movement, a global organisation with 3.5 million members with over 20 years' experience. He has been, with over 20 years experience, he has been instrumental in developing ordinary citizens into transformative leaders in their own lives, communities and societies through value-based social action. Devitt's organising efforts have contributed significantly to the Alliance's successes, such as securing funding to improve public transport in Logan, establish community maternity hubs and advocate for concession fares for people seeking asylum. So, now that we've done all the introductions, basically we've got to flip a coin, but what we've just discovered is that we are also advanced, that we don't actually, any of us have a coin. So I'm going to get Selwyn, oh wait, Katie's got a coin. So I will say, if it's heads, then we'll go with Selwyn Button from the affirmative side to kick off the debate. And if it's tails, we'll go with Jess Conlon to kick off the negative side. So heads for you, Selwyn. And it's tails. So Jess is up first. So basically what's going to happen today is you're going to hear from Jess first, then Selwyn, and then we'll head back over to Bo, and then Devitt. Each will have 5 minutes to basically speak about what got them to the yes and the no to their decision. So once you jump up, your time will be kept, and you'll find out when you've got 1 minute and 30 seconds to go, and then we'll kick off with the next person. So Jess, please take it away and begin by introducing yourself and what your stance is.
Awesome. So my name's Jess Conlon, and I am voting no at this referendum. From the outset, I think we can agree that most of Australians agree on 2 points. One is that we need recognition in our constitution for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as being the first peoples of this country. And the second is that there are significant gaps in outcomes between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, particularly those in communities, and in comparison to their city or non-Indigenous counterparts. So for the first, unfortunately, the way the referendum is worded is that recognition and the voice are put together, so you can't break them apart. So there may be a lot of people out there who are supporting recognition but are voting no because of the voice. So to the voice, I believe the lack of detail that has been given so far in relation to the voice is a big part of why a lot of people are saying no. And that is directly correlated with outcomes. So you're talking about outcomes in education, health, housing. They're the big three that we keep being told by all of the experts, the academics, the politicians. They're the three big key factors that we have a massive gap between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders and their non-Indigenous counterparts. The voice does not include any detail about how any of that will be practically achieved. So currently, the Australian government and all the taxpayers fund for an agency called the National Indigenous Australians Agency, and it did fund this iteration of it in previous forms. And the agency's vision, as their website, is that it is to ensure that all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are heard, empowered and recognised. Now, if this agency that we are funding and all the institutions like it are not making sure that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are being heard, recognised and empowered, what do we think another committee in Canberra is going to do to achieve this, including further taxpayer dollars? So last estimate that I looked, and it could be different now, it's going to be under $400 million, including the cost of this referendum for the next 3 years. That's $400 million that could be spent directly in local communities instead of bureaucracy, again, in Canberra. In 2000, ATSI, which was the previous iteration of, one of the previous iterations of the NIAA, commissioned a report that there was a gap in what Canberra were doing compared to local communities. They were not engaging with the people that they were supposed to be funded for and to serve. So as a recommendation from that, it was recommended that the structure. Oh, I've run out of battery. Does this one? Oh, awesome, thanks. it was recommended that the structure of it change so that it was engaging directly in local communities. So local Indigenous, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people could have a direct say in issues that directly affected them. So I really don't see how another level of bureaucracy, another Canberra committee embedded in our legislation, in our constitution, is going to have any practical effect on these outcomes. Now, I want to make this point really clear because civics seems to be missing in some of our curriculums, but all Australians have a voice, and that is through your elected member of parliament. And all Australians can make representations to government, and that is through your elected member of parliament. That's how democracy works, and that's how it currently is in our constitution. And at this point in time, in our country, we have 11 Indigenous representatives across both houses. That's 11 voices who are speaking not only for themselves, but their constituents and their communities. So I really don't understand how we would divide Australia by race by adding an extra say or an extra influence to only one group of people. Now, my generation and the previous generation have been reckoning with historical crimes that are morally repugnant on current values. And we have been atoning for the sins that are not ours. But we really need to come together and continue to find a way to move forward. Australia is a country full of opportunity. That's why so many to choose Australia as their home, including refugees who are running away from their countries full of violence. And also migrants who just want a better way of life, so they come to Australia. And I think that by adding this separate body who can have an additional say above all others in our sacred document, our fundamental law, by having an extra group of people say mental document, I think is the big division that is not going to be it is not going to be a positive way forward for all Australians. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. Sorry, we're having some technical difficulties in the technical school. No jokes. But that was fantastic. Thank you, Jess. And some of the things that you outlined in there were the lack of detail, that this could be another bureaucratic mechanism, that it's a $400 million exercise that could be going directly into local communities, that you think all Australians have a voice, and that is through their local member, and that we already have 11 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Parliament. So those are some of the things that I picked up. I'm looking forward to hearing what the rebuttal will be, which you guys will be given 3 minutes to rebut that later. But before we do that, we're going to head to Selwyn Button, who is from our affirmative side. So Selwyn, please, you can stay seated or you can stand. It's totally up to you. Take it away.
I might just sit down if that's okay. Feels more relaxed doing that. If you don't move around, the mic might work for you. Thanks very much, Karina. Can also acknowledge traditional owners and acknowledge the ancestry of the land here for the Jagera and Turrbal people, and pay respects to their custodianship of this country. So my name's Selwyn Button. I'm here as a supporter of the Yes campaign. I've also been involved as part of the referendum groups with Minister Burney and the Attorney General throughout the process. A couple of things just to touch on in the sense of where this has come from, and some historical pieces about what's been happening for a long period of time in relation to looking at recognition of our people in the Constitution. So it's not something that's new. This hasn't just arrived in the past couple of years. It didn't just happen as a result of the Uluru Statement. There'd been a lot of work that's happened prior to 2017 when the signing of the Uluru Statement happened, where there'd been lobbying efforts from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people right across the country in relation to structural change within the Australian Constitution and representation to be able to influence laws and policies that affect us. We go back to 1938, was the first recorded evidence of when that first happened, and it was by a Yorta Yorta man from Shepparton, William Cooper, who actually got a petition to the King at the time through the Governor of Victoria in relation to looking at some structural changes to ensure that his people were represented and had a voice in the Australian Parliament. So it's been going on for a long period of time. We had then the 1972 Bark Petition, the Yirrkala Bark Petition, we've had the Barunga Statement, we've had a whole heap of representations from Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people right across the country that said, things aren't working for us, we need change, we need fundamental change, and many of them spoke to that fundamental change around recognition and voice. A lot of them didn't actually say recognition and voice, but the actual principles of what all of those efforts were talking about is being able to provide advice to government about laws and policies that affect us the most. So those things have been going on for a while. This isn't a new thing that's occurred. What has led to this new piece is a conversation that happened in 2015. And that conversation at the time was with a group of Indigenous leaders who sat at the table with the Prime Minister of the day, who was Tony Abbott back then, and the opposition leader was Bill Shorten. And it was a meeting that was held at Kirribilli House. And that meeting was to focus on what we needed to do to look at recognition in the Australian Constitution. It wasn't a conversation about a matter of should we do it. It was a conversation about how to do it. And so the discussion that we had then with both leaders of the time within the group was to say, let's table a process. Let's come up with a process that we think is going to work best to get the best advice. There had been reports prior to that. There had been a referendum council report, there'd been a parliamentary inquiry, and there'd been a parliamentary committee report. So there'd been pieces of research where people have undertaken some work to determine what it might look like or to come up with some different models. The conversation in 2015 was simply about how do we do it? What's the best way to do this? So the conversation we had with them at the time, with Tony Abbott at the time, and I was in the room on that day, the conversation we had was to ensure that we actually needed to go and have conversations with our own mob across the country. And that was the start of the National Constitutional Conventions for Indigenous People. Now, there were 12 of those across the country, in every state and territory, in regional locations, in cities, etc. And it culminated in the 13th one, and the 13th one was held at Uluru. Now, the reason why they're important is that you had thousands of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people coming to those conversations to have a conversation about recognition in the Constitution, and overwhelmingly the majority of people were saying that what we wanted was a voice, what we wanted to be is recognised in the Constitution, and that recognition is through voice. So it came from Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people, didn't come from Anthony Albanese, didn't come from the Labor government. This is a concept that's come from our own people, and that's why it's important to make sure at least we're continuing down that path, because it is something that Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people have asked and wanted. Now, my last 30 seconds, because I just had the card thrown up to me, I'm going to focus on the actual clause, because I think it's important for people to read the actual clause that's being proposed to include in the Constitution. And the clause reads, it's 3 sentences. The first sentence is about recognition of the first people of this country, and that's through a voice. That's the first sentence. The second sentence is then what that does. And what they do is make representations to Parliament and the executive government about issues and matters that affect them. And that's Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people. That's the second part. The third part of the clause, proposed clause, is then about giving Parliament the power to develop the legislation about what the voice will do. Right. So the form and the function and the detail about what the actual voice will do sits in the third clause that's being proposed.
I think that's the part where I've just got to cut you off. Thank you, Selwyn. Selwyn, you delved into a number of different topics there, particularly kind of setting the scene as to what led up to the voice referendum. You mentioned Uncle William Cooper back in 1938 and the Barunga Statement. And how those things kind of led to where we got to now, and your point being that this is not a new thing that has come about. Also, you spoke about the Parliament's responsibility in presenting this as well, in that this would be a voice to Parliament, who then decides how that then that voice is then used. So thank you so much, Selwyn. And just a reminder to everyone to jump onto the Menti and to make sure that you're contributing to the conversation. We also want to grab questions from you guys. And so we're up to Bo Spearham. It's your turn to present your thoughts as a negative voting no person, what you think about the referendum and what it means for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and all Australians. Thank you, Bo.
Yama, Bo Spirum, want to acknowledge, the fellow countrymen on the panel, and if there's any other blackfellas of the crowd as well. It's been a very big time for blackfellas around the country because we continue to be put in places and in front of faces, and maybe even minds that don't think or act or have that lived experience as we do. And while we pursue the sort of avenues that we do, whether we're yes or no, we're always put in this position to debate, on behalf of other people who are going to make that decision for us, which is an unfair process in my eyes. What I've got to talk about as well is just highlighting some of the, some of the, if I'm on the negative side, the negative things that I feel have happened and where portions of the community have been marginalised and not heard. And, this is a process that goes back as far as, 2010 and 2012 with the Recognise campaign as well, where, a lot of mob have continued to sort of advocate against that in that place as well. Not too long ago, a few of us made, it was a rebuttal to 12 reasons why, to vote for the Voice to Parliament. And so we just wrote 12 problems with the Voice to Parliament, and authored by a bunch of mob in different parts of the country. So go through a couple of those just to sort of give a bit of context, because I think at the moment, the yes side continues to play on the moral compass of people, and sort of this moral compass that we need people to decide our future, or we're in a position where we can't advocate for ourselves, which isn't that case. A lot of us represent boards and parts of community where we advocate very strongly, and have so for quite a while. Well, what we do know as well is there's this conversation around 80% of blackfellas, support the idea of the voice, or there was, tens of thousands of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people around the country that participated in some conversations and, pushed this forward, when we do know that with the regional dialogues and the conversation in Uluru, there was less than 10,000 people that was a part of these regional dialogues in many parts of the country, which represent less than 1% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in this country. And when we're talking about, fair debates and whatnot as well, we've got to acknowledge that, the sides of this campaign, the progressive no, as people are calling it, and the yes vote. The progressive no isn't a side that has been funded. We're printing these off the goodwill of, community members in different parts of the country, and asking those to support us and hear, our claim, and why we're frustrated as well. There's always been this notion that, we need a new body to sort of advocate on behalf of blackfellas, when we do have people within those positions, from politicians to, mob who advocate at a very high level in regards to the health, the education, and the well-being of our mob. I work in one of those sectors as well. And, I want to make it really, really clear how different, this whole progressive no and racist no is as well. It's very, very different. And, the progressive no advocates on the basis of Aboriginal self-determination, and that this was and always will be Aboriginal land, and hasn't been ceded. And there's many, many conversations that need to happen today and tomorrow, and in this lead up to this sort of to the vote as well. Now, and that big conversation is what other ideas, what other alternatives are out there for blackfellas to have a discussion about. Someone mentioned, historically, there has been many different voices that have gone and many different sort of iterations of sort of what we can look forward to. And one of those ringing ones was immortalised in a song by Yossi Yindi, which is.
I do love cutting Bo off, no jokes. I used to be a co-host with Bo at one point. Thank you, Bo. You came out with a number of different points. I think the one that where you spoke about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people already having a voice, giving the example that some of us sit on boards, which I actually think all of us sit on a board or two. You also said that 80% of blackfellas who are said to be voting yes does not actually represent the constituents of Indigenous people who are voting yes, and that less than 10,000 people attended the initial Voice to Parliament or Statement of the Heart event that occurred in 2017. And you also pointed to the fact that you feel as though the progressive no's are not receiving the same kind of support, financial support, as the Yes campaign. So all very interesting points. You guys are going to be encouraged to give your views at the end of this. And you guys are also going to be able to rebut this very shortly. But to finish off the yes part of the debate, we have Devitt. Devitt, you can stand, you can sit, you can do whatever makes you feel comfortable, but hold that microphone nice and close to your mouth. Take it away.
Thank you. I'll start by sitting, but I'm a terrible mumbler, so if you're having trouble hearing me, give me a wave and I'll stand up and try and talk more clearly. As Karina said, my name is Devitt Kennedy. I'm the lead organiser for the Queensland Community Alliance, and I'd like to join in acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands that we meet on, the Turrbal and the Yagara people here, as well as the Yugambeh people where I live in Logan. And pay our respects to elders past and present, and recognise that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land, that sovereignty has never been ceded. So the Queensland Community Alliance brings together 32 different organisations that are faith groups, unions, community organisations and ethnic associations to work together for the common good. We use a process of community organising to do that. And so we, across our member organisations, come from a whole really diverse range of groups and diverse political positions, but are united this year in accepting the invitation of the Uluru Statement from the Heart to walk together with First Nations people and to say yes to voice as a key step in that. But that's a commitment not just up until the 14th of October, that's a commitment beyond that as well. So I'm going to tell you 2 stories and then 3 points after that about why I and we collectively are involved in this and why we're urging people to vote yes. The first for me personally is about a wise First Nations woman, an Aboriginal woman who challenged me earlier in the year and said, this system that we have in this country, as a white person and a white man, this system is yours whether you want it to be or not. And the decision that you're making when you vote at the end of the year is, do you want me and do you want us to be part of that system or not? It's a really stark question to be asked by someone that you care about. And my answer to that is yes. And the second story is a story about my dad. I've been lucky to be doing community organising this year in Townsville and to sit down with both Aboriginal elders and Torres Strait Islander elders up there in Townsville this year. And my dad used to be a Catholic priest in Townsville about 50 years ago. And so the people that he used to know up there that were young people at the time are now elders, those who are still around. And I had people like Auntie Graceland Smallwood say to me, your dad was with us in the park when we were trying to set up the medical clinic and we were trying to stand up for our rights, and we were getting bashed by the police. And I think that gives me such mixed feelings, because I've got pride that my dad was someone that was in relationship with these people, that was recognising their leadership, that was part of setting up the first Aboriginal medical clinic in Townsville by getting the Catholic Church to donate the land that the clinic was set up in. But it also kind of tears me up that they're the same issues that we're dealing with now, that things haven't moved forward that much over those 50 years. And that essentially Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people have never really been listened to in this country. You know, they haven't been listened to when the land was being taken, haven't been listened when the children were being stolen, haven't been listened when the wages were being stolen. That we're still not listening, as there's continuing deaths in custody at record levels, and continuing to not to listen to as the life expectancy gap of more than 8 years. And we know in this country that when you listen to people who are affected by a decision, you get better outcomes. And that's not an Indigenous thing, that's an everyone thing. In my community in Logan, when women who are having babies were listened to about the best way to do maternity care, we went from having one of the lowest rates of maternal care in Queensland to being higher than the state average.
All right. Devitt O'Brien, or Devitt Kennedy rather, Nee O'Brien. Devitt and I went to school together, by the way. So, Devitt, you came up with a number of interesting arguments. So you mentioned that you at QCA work with 32 different organisations who are all supporting this and all behind this. And you mentioned a conversation you had with a First Nations elder who put it to you, as you being a non-Indigenous person, saying that you own the system, that that it's owned by non-Indigenous people, and it's a really simple question: do you want Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to be a part of it, or don't they? You also mentioned that ATSI people have not been listened to traditionally. You mentioned about stolen wages, black deaths in custody, life expectancy, that those disparities are still existing. So some really great points there. I look forward to hearing some of the rebuttals which are about to come. And so Jess, I'm going to hand it over to you. And I'm going to remind everyone's going to be given 3 minutes to rebut. Jess, Selwyn, Bo and Devitt, the same. And you guys will be able to answer the question on your Menti. So hopefully you guys, and also contribute to questions here today. I'm really keen to hear from you guys. There's a reason why you guys came along, and we want this to be robust and we want to get the most out of it. So please don't be embarrassed to come forward and ask any type of question. Take it away, Jess.
Thanks. There's a lot to unpack and I only have 3 minutes, so I'll pick the key items. What I would say in rebuttal to Selwyn would be, we hear a lot about what the voice will, do. It's going to have outcomes. It's what the Indigenous people wanted. They want this voice in our Constitution. They wrote it. We've had consultation. This is what they want. And yet the discrepancy is there are gaps in outcomes, and no one can actually explain to me how adding a separate right in our fundamental document of making representations to a government who is political anyway is going to achieve outcomes. And to Devitt's point, yes, you want to be heard, but the voice doesn't actually say anyone has to listen, unfortunately. The voice is, which I disagree with, an extra opportunity for people to make representations when they are not heard. it's unfair and it goes against the principles of democracy that is our constitution, which is for the benefit of all. We are very privileged to live in a democracy where our constitution actually works. If you turn on the news, there are many other countries where democracy is not working. It is failing and more of their citizens are being prosecuted. So this idea that by including an additional right for only one set of group, and let's be honest, it's race, it's racial based, will somehow give practical outcomes to those who are desperately in need of our help and have been failed by federal government Canberra bureaucracies. No, sorry, I didn't want to go over time. And to your other point around the Catholic Church assisting, I think the Catholic Church should hand over a lot more money to people. We need more organisations who are holding the wealth to actually chip in and help. This isn't just a federal government Canberra issue, this is an everyone issue. And while I continue to fund, without complaining, through my taxes, the NIAA or institutions that are similar, I think that we should be getting some outcomes. We should be getting reports as to why these institutions are failing. Why are we spending billions of dollars in an institution whose sole purpose is to ensure that people are being heard when they're not being heard and we can't demonstrate where the money is going?
Fantastic. Thank you, Jess. And make sure we keep an eye on our timer over here. She'll let you know when there's 30 seconds left to go. But Jess, some of your rebuttals around how adding an extra committee to the Parliament process would just be another added thing that's been done before, was one of your points. The idea that providing a voice will change the whole bureaucratic process that occurs in the system was another point. And then also your point around Catholic churches, who you said receive quite a lot of money, and how they could be, that you encourage them to contribute financially to some of the issues affecting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So thank you so much. Selwyn, you've got 3 minutes and your time starts now.
Thanks, Karina. If we go back to basics in terms of first principles, the fundamental principle of the voice is an opportunity for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to sit at the table with politicians and senior bureaucrats to inform policy and legislation. That's it. At its heart, that's what it is. Why do we need to do that? Because for many years, since 1967, when the power was given to the Commonwealth Government to actually develop legislation and policy based on race, by the way, which only has ever been used for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people since 1967, the federal government was given that power. There's never been an opportunity for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to influence what that looks like. We have been the recipients of bad policy. We've been the recipients of bad legislation since 1967. There's been some good stuff throughout the process. Predominantly, it's actually led to the significant gaps that we see in circumstances, social economic outcomes throughout people across the country. So to be able to sit at the table when those ideas are being developed is what the voice represents, an opportunity to influence it at the earliest point as opposed to being a recipient at the end of it when the thing comes out. What we need to be able to do, and this goes direct to the heart of this being, yes, we're talking about a national voice, but the essence of a national voice is nothing without a connection to local and regional voices. We need to be able to connect to those local and regional stories to then influence the conversations that are happening at a national level. The national voice is only but an amplification of local and regional voices. And that's the design principle of the voice, is very much about connecting locally, democratically elected, very much based geographic representation, gender-based, having youth representation. All of those things are design principles of the voice. Now, if I go to one quick example, because I know I'm running out of time, go to one quick example in the sense of some of the stuff that goes on here in the middle of Brisbane. And how do we connect it to the voice? We have what's on the north side of Brisbane called Hospital in the Home. And it's a process where our services, our Aboriginal medical services, work with the large based hospitals to ensure that our people who go into hospital for certain conditions have a transition home much quicker and are provided better care. Why that's a good thing to focus on? Because at a national level, one of the main indicators for hospitals across the country is about avoidable admissions. And Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people are represented in avoided admissions, 3.5 times the rate as everyone else. What we're doing in the north side of Brisbane is actually reducing that. What that's doing for taxpayer dollars is reducing the amount of money that's spent on frequent flyers coming through a hospital. Across the country, if we actually just halved the gap in avoided admissions for Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people, we would reduce the overall spend in hospitals by $5 billion on Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people. But we only have one local story and one local success here in the middle of Brisbane.
We do.
We need to amplify that through a
Yes.
national
Thank you,
voice
Selwyn.
to scale it up to make it work better.
Thank you, Selwyn. You touched on a number of interesting points there. That this would be give the opportunity for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to influence at the earlier stages the implementation and creation of policies and legislation that subsequently impact Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people right across the country. You spoke about the design principle and that it would be a principle that would include people from the younger generations, people of all genders, and from different geographical areas. And you mentioned about hospital and the home on the north side, which actually exists on the south side as well. But that with the voice, this could lead to changing policies that then could trickle down and change things like hospital in the home, which were some very interesting points, Selwyn. So now I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Bo Spearham, who is going to follow on for the negatives and give his rebuttal. Your time starts now, Bo. Thank you.
When I introduced myself, I said, Yama, my name is Bo Spearham, I'm Gomeroi, Kuma, and Marawari. I don't identify as being an Australian or a Queenslander or somebody who comes from New South Wales. And one of the reasons why, I've always, voted no, but recently, I guess in like the last 12 months, wanted to really, be a part of sort of this No campaign is when the Labor government got in. There was two really significant things that Albanese said. One was he wants to go down this process of, a voice to Parliament. And I don't know if it was before or after that, he went on and spoke about the importance of supporting the gas industry. Where I come from in northern New South Wales, the Labor Party supports, the Narrabri gas project, which wants to frack the Pilliga Forest, which sits above the Great Artesian Basin, one of the biggest underground water aquifers, which reaches, I think, 3 to 4 states in this country. And they want to put 850 gas wells in the first sort of stage. At the very moment that he wanted something good for blackfellas, along with this process of we know what's economically good for this country. Previous federal around exact same thing, Susan Lane. Monetary gain outweighs the cultural significance, of this part of the country. We know a lot of the backers of this are mining companies like Rio Tinto, who, just before Black Lives Matter happened or around that time, destroyed, 35,000-year-old sacred caves. Whether or not they had discussions with blackfellas, they went ahead and done that. And we're in this sort of post-Black Lives Matter era where, I don't know, maybe some of you in this room put a black tile up and came to the rallies, and hopefully tried to amplify those voices. The Constitution is racist. This continent, still is embedded in racism. It's embedded with powers where our mobs still, are over-incarcerated, are overrepresented in child removals and many other places as well. And that's off the back of racism. I think there needs to be a lot more work done before we have any kind of good discussion on goodwill or faith. Mob are still dying at a high rate, and I don't think we're in a position, and definitely, 27 million people aren't in the right position morally to make a decision for 800,000 blackfellas.
Thank you, Bo. Only 3 minutes to be able to cover off on some really important topics there, but I think you did a great job. You mentioned some of the things that you mentioned were around the fact that the Labor Party supports The Voice, but also, in your opinion, support other questionable initiatives such as fracking and mining, particularly in places like your country, down on Cooma country. You also mentioned that Rio Tinto is a great example of someone that's destroyed the Juukan Caves without speaking to blackfellas, and The Voice is not going to change that. And then you also said, you spoke about racism in Australia and how it is very much embedded within our culture, and that is very much alive and well here in Australia, and that The Voice is not going to change that. So I think, and you mentioned as well, that you can see the racism in Australia through the incarceration rates, through the number of child removals, also with the disparity around health outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So some really good points there that we've all touched on. And we're going to finish up with you, Devitt. Take it away.
All right. So firstly, we have already a tradition in this country, in our constitution, of having mechanisms to make sure that populations of smaller numbers get heard and get an equal representation. So Tasmania, that has a population around 500,000, has the same number of senators as New South Wales does, with a population of almost 9 million. What is that? That's an arrangement in our constitution to make sure that that small state doesn't just get decisions made about it by bigger states that are unfair. We have already in our constitution these kind of arrangements that are about evening up power imbalances. So The Voice is in the tradition that the Australian Constitution already has within it. It's not a radical departure. Secondly, in terms of detail, let's think about if the Australian Constitution in 1901 put a whole lot of detail in the Constitution about what our Defence Force should look like. It'd talk about them riding on horseback. It'd talk about them using rifles and swords. It'd talk about a whole lot of detailed things that now, 100 years later, would not be appropriate. That's why we don't spell out the detail of the exact composition of The Voice in the Constitution. That's why the Parliament works that out afterwards. And it's the same for our Defence Force, it's the same for the Parliament, it's the same for the High Court. I guess the question was put to me a few months ago. If The Voice existed when the Stolen Generation was happening, do you think it would have gone down the same way? Do you think it would have happened the same way? So I think that's the kind of question that we're asking, and it's okay that we disagree on that answer. But I think my perspective is it would have been different. It would have been different, and we have a chance now to make sure that it is different in future. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Devitt. You're not one to finish early, but that was great. Thank you so much. I think there's been a lot of rich debate here today, and so now I'm going to throw it open to the audience, and I really encourage everyone to sort of jump on board, but I just want to wrap up a couple of things that you just said. But you pointed to the fact that this is not really a radical approach, that constitutional change, when the Constitution was formed back in 1901, if we had had the level of detail that, you know, for example, you mentioned before, Jess, that you would like to see more detail, then we would be creating a constitution that was only fit for that time, which was an interesting point. I haven't heard that one before. But you also said that if The Voice had existed during during the Stolen Generation period, would the child removals had existed? And I thought that was a really interesting point for you to raise as well. I don't know where everyone stands on it, but I'm interested to hear from you guys. So please, if you have a question, just raise your hand and we can come to you. Might take a, oh, here we go. We've got someone right up the front here, and then I'll go to you just a bit further up the back. Please, I'm going to get someone to bring you a microphone over. And I will just mention also that this debate is also being televised on Sky News tonight. So if you'd like to see that, you can jump on the channel, the Sky News channel, to have a look and to see, to catch it on that channel 601. You can also catch it again on the Best Debate. If you type in Best Debate QUT, that'll come up as your first option, and you'll be able to chuck in that link and do that. So let's go.
All right, thank you. Sorry,
Nice and close to your mouth.
I forget your name, sorry. What was your name? Jess. All right. Yes, this is for you. So I guess, what is your response to Devitt's rebuttal about, the need for flexibility in the wording of the proposed change? He says that it's in the spirit of the drafting of, sections like, in regard to the High Court, and also it's similar in wording to the section 51. So how do you respond to the need for flexibility? Because, if we get bogged down in the detail, that can make it really difficult to change those laws in the future, which is obviously difficult because we need a referendum.
Good question. Okay, this is on. So my view is it shouldn't go in at all. The detail that I'm referring to is in terms of what is it going to look like. So the wording that we've got now is quite vague, and I personally think it'll be open to High Court interpretation, being the only jurisdiction that can actually answer questions on the Constitution if it was successful. But in terms of sort of the arguments around Senate composition and High Court composition, well, they're functions of our government, and they're houses, so House of Reps, Senate, High Court, they're all different functions of the Westminster system. The Westminster system doesn't say we have a fourth category that we're going to pick a, part of the population, and we're going to say they can sit at the table but no one else can. And so that's my view. It shouldn't be in there at all anyway.
An interesting take. Devitt, maybe Selwyn or Bo, you may have something to say to that. Would you like to respond? Selwyn has something to say.
One of the things that already exists in the Australian Constitution, I don't know whether you read it, it's pretty dry, but there is a one-liner that talks about parliamentary committees. Parliamentary committees, for those that aren't aware, are committees that are formed to provide expert advice to government through current sitting politicians as well as members of the public about policy and legislation. Parliamentary committees, the one line already exists. The actual form and function of parliamentary committees sits in the standing orders of Parliament. So the absolute details are already written in something else. It doesn't sit in the Constitution. Funnily enough, they provide advice on policy and legislation all the time. Interestingly enough, sometimes their reports are accepted, sometimes their reports are rejected, depending upon the flavour of the political party of the day that the tabling of that report goes to, depends on the response to what's going in the recommendations and how those things are viewed. The other thing of note for parliamentary committee reports, which have been a function of our Constitution since 1901, that there's been none of those that have taken to the High Court to be challenged, that parliamentary committees themselves haven't turned around and said, okay, you guys have rejected our advice, we're going to take you to court because we think our advice should trump what sits in the legislation that you guys are going to put forward anyway.
Thank you. Devitt, do you want to follow up, or Bo? No, you're good. No worries. We've got someone up the back here who had his hand up in the pink shirt. Again, I encourage you guys to jump on and answer those three questions that I read out to you before around your thoughts on the Constitution, on the referendum. Take it away.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to ask about the mechanics. So in the no vote, when I listen to the no vote, there seems to be a lot of reference to stories. My father was a priest. But can someone explain to me the mechanics? So parliamentary committee, great example. Why is the Voice then not just a parliamentary committee as opposed to something separate? And then my question, I think, to the yes people was then, or to anybody, if just for my understanding, is once this thing is voted in, do I, as a voter, have the authority or the capacity to steer that thing along its journey? So can I come in at a later stage and go, this is not working for me, I'd like to vote differently on this occasion. Being that it's a referendum that's rather rare, as a voter, what authority do I have beyond this here and now to adjust anything?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, what's your name?
Rodney Reinders.
Thanks, Rodney. So Rodney came with 2 questions. So why isn't it just a parliamentary committee rather than being a separate entity altogether? And then if it doesn't work, is there a mechanism by which someone like Rodney can go back and say, well, I actually don't think it's working and I would like to see it change, and so-and-so? Who would like to? Selwyn?
I think that's one for me. Thanks, mate. Good question. Parliamentary committees exist. Parliamentary committees are formed by the Parliament of the day. So they do change, and membership changes, and people change that sit on those parliamentary committees that provides advice. And when I talked about the history of representation to look at changing policy and legislation that's been happening in our country for a long period of time for our people, the reason why that happens is because we have constant churn. We have prime ministers every couple of years. We went through about a period there where there were 4 or 5 prime ministers in 2 years. So we have constantly changing political parties. We have constantly changing ministers, constantly changing bureaucrats that head up public services around across the country. So the constant, what we're asking for is a constant. And that constant is the voice to Parliament, where our people can provide advice. Whoever the Parliament of the day is, our people can provide advice. And that's why we're asking for it to sit in the Constitution, because then it becomes the constant. Now, why wouldn't we do a parliamentary committee? Because those things will continue to change. The other piece, in respect of one of the design principles of the voice to Parliament, is around then the democratic election process. The democratic election process for the voice to Parliament is from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. But what the Australian public will get to influence, no different to any other piece of legislation, is if we have a successful referendum after 14th of October, the Parliament is then responsible for designing the legislation, which is about the form and function of the voice. That actually has to go out for public consultation. So every Australian will be able to influence and provide input into what the form and function of the voice looks like when the legislation goes out for public consultation.
There was a second part to that question, Selwyn, and that was that if it doesn't work, can Rodney, can the everyday Australian,
I might take that question.
Okay.
If you are unhappy with the change to the Constitution, the only way to change the Constitution is another referendum. So we'd have to do this whole rigmarole again, get 2 majorities. But I just want to jump off the back of what Selwyn just said. So as I understand it, that it's going to be designed by Parliament, voted by Parliament, constructed by Parliament. Except Parliament is the majority of the day, so it's political. So it doesn't matter who is in, it will automatically be political. And if they're constructing it, then they can dismantle it too.
Thank you, Jess. Bo, is that something that you would want to reflect on?
Just again, sort of, other people having the right to sort of have a say in our, which is wrong again. I think, one, you shouldn't be voting and then lay down a track if this goes through or doesn't go through. I don't think you should have a say. There's a long history of what people, people's decisions have had on us, and riddled by those to this day, or very specific advocate against, historical facts still to this day horn out people. So I don't think you should have a decision at all, or anybody in this auditorium that is an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person. This discussion should have been left up to ourselves, but it wasn't. And then I think one of the key reasons is to play on the moral compass of the majority of people, especially with the last few years that we've had, a rise in a lot of people, coming to Invasion Day events and getting sick of sort of seeing the national narrative when it comes to blackfellas, and then also post Black Lives Matter. Like I said, a lot of people, wanted to change the reality that blackfellas die in custody. A process that's going to stop that.
Thank you, Bo. And I think that's a really interesting contribution. David, you had something that you wanted to say to that question? No, we'll leave it at that. We have a question up here. Hold the mic nice and close. And we're about to wrap up, guys, so we're keen for a couple more questions. I don't know, put your hand up now if you've, yep, we've got someone up in the middle here and someone down the front. So we've got 2 more questions, and then we're going to have some food out here on the deck and some wine. So if you would like to join us for further conversations or just to, you know, come and have a wine, then please do. So tell us what your name is and your question.
Hi, my name's Annette, and I love that you have come to speak to us tonight, so thank you. I guess we all agree that we want better practical outcomes. And I have a nephew, his name is Justin. He is Aboriginal. He is 32 years old. He has spent 90% of his adult life in jail. He has spent part of his life in juvenile detention. And my question, firstly to you, Selwyn, is under the Karma Langton model, he would not be allowed to be a member of The Voice because he has a criminal record that has put him in jail for longer than 2 years. So how does The Voice improve life for people like Justin? And my question for Bo is, how does not having a voice to Parliament improve outcomes for people like my nephew?
Thank you, Annette. There were 2 questions there, and I've got them written down, but if you can, do you remember them? I think so. Go for it, Selwyn.
Thanks for the easy question too, right? If I go to the first one, what The Voice can do and what The Voice would be doing for Justin is looking at Justin's history and determining, well, what are the triggers that happened in Justin's life that we need to look at some of those local stories that influence his trajectory. It's as simple as that. And if we look at some of the things in relation to where current government spend goes and current government spend, there's more spending on youth detention centres than there is on keeping kids in school. So it's a pretty simple thing to know that, okay, if we're going to do anything about improving Justin's life trajectory, it's about what are we doing for him to keep him engaged in school, to keep him learning, to ensure that he's on the path to completing school, because obviously the biggest thing that we know in terms of life trajectory is if you're in youth detention, then you're already on the path to ending up in prison as an adult anyway. So it's learning from the stories and learning from those examples to work out, well, where are the trigger points that we need to focus on? And those things come from local stories. There's lots of work that's been done in Western New South Wales around places like Burke, where they're focused on justice reinvestment. And justice reinvestment initiatives are about investing earlier, investing sooner, as opposed to at the back end, once young people end up in the whole juvenile detention process and get in that cyclical approach to being incarcerated. It's about focusing on schooling, focusing on engagement, focusing on keeping them occupied with something that's going to give them a better life trajectory. That's what we learn from Justin's experience, is to work out how do we do those things better. It may not be about Justin actually being part of the voice, but he's got a voice and he's got a story to tell that actually influences what the voice should be focusing on in those local stories that are going to make things better. Now, you remind me of the second part, Karina.
The second part was actually for Bo to say, if we don't have a voice to Parliament, when I say we, I mean Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people don't have a voice to Parliament, how will that help people like Annette's nephew, who has been incarcerated for the majority of his adult life? Bo?
Yeah, well, I guess it's where you're going for your source of information and who you're listening to, because Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people have been advocating, since these fellows got off the ship and started killing our people. And every sort of, as Selwyn gave that introduction of history, Aboriginal people have been advocating since day one. We know what we want, we know what we don't want, we know what works, and we know that these policies, will have major effects on us. So it is where you get information from and who you're listening to. In this process, a lot of Aboriginal people are divided. With a progressive understanding that we want the best for our people, we just want it in a different way, I guess. And I can respect that, from a lot of our mob. One thing is, we can create, scholarships and programs, and we can change legislations and laws and the Constitution, but the hard fact is it's not going to stop racism. These things are going to happen tomorrow and what, the 16th or the 15th of October. It's still going to exist. The same police force that we have today is the same police force that existed, and ran alongside with the Native Mounted Police to slaughter blackfellas all over this country. It's the same institutions in hospitals that deny blackfellas the rights for adequate health care. That's why we have our own health services, because the system isn't fair and it doesn't work in a way that supports our communities. That's why throughout all of Australia, you're going to find an Aboriginal health service, an Aboriginal legal service, and all these things for blackfellas, because not once did, the parliament or politicians say, we want to support you in overcoming this. It was the blackfellas getting their heads beaten in here, kicking these gates down back in the 80s, or getting locked up in Musgrave Park, for changing laws and legislations over 30 years ago. The Black Axe here in Queensland. These are the things that fundamentally keep Australia going. That's why, they're supporting a mining industry over, uplifting and empowering and holding, one of the oldest, richest, cultures in this country. That's what I can't get past. Is that, they're not ready to not be racist. They're going to continue to do these things that harm Aboriginal people, and all these, programs, these justice reinvestment programs, a lot of them are off the back of an oily rag, because blackfellas know what's best for our community. Me and Karina sat on the radio interviewing lots of different community members and family members who want to sort of advocate for a better future. And some of those people we spoke to are voting for those people that are voting no. But my thing is, I just can't get past racism. And the fact that, a lot of people are choosing to vote no because of, all the racist fellas, I find ironic, because, I feel that this process that has been, spearheaded, is a racist process, and is an unjust process, and is an unfair process, where our own blackfellas have chosen to exclude members and blackfellas in different parts of Australia in these early kind of discussions and dialogues. It's been a racist sort of process from the beginning, and hopefully, when these old dinosaurs die, we can move forward and create sort of something better. But, as we've seen in many parts of the country, it's really for a rise in, fascism in this country. We saw laws passed not to buy Nazi memorabilia, and we saw politicians actually go here and buy things before, they went out of stock. But, my thing is, racism is still going to exist, and it's sad. We live in a racist world. And blackfellas, we do everything that we can to keep our head above that, whether we raise our kids or look after our old people. And, I think that's the side that a lot of people don't see.
Thank you, Bo. And, really pointing to that issue around racism for you, and fundamentally saying that you believe that a voice will not, given the structures that currently exist, that the voice would not contribute to lessening racism here in Australia. So thank you for sharing that. We have a question just up the middle here with the guy with the pink shirt. But just while you're getting the microphone up here for our last, we're going to have to make that our last question. Just up here is the QR code. Can everyone please make sure that they've signed, that they've logged into that, because it'd be really great to hear what you guys think. People that are online, and there are somewhere around 70 people online. So please, if you could jump on and check out the QR code, take a photo of the QR code, and it'll take you to some questions. Those questions that will be presented are based around the voice being a positive way forward for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but also for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and all Australians, but then also Will you be voting yes or no in the upcoming elections? We all know that we've seen lots of talk around the polls. And having this discussion is really quite interesting for me. I have a personal relationship with 3 of the panel members on this panel, and I've always said that I will not disclose what I am voting for. I don't think that's important in this process. I think my job here is to ensure that we have a range of voices and that there's dialogue that's happening. Sadly and unfortunately, the vitriol and the hate that has been spat in the last particularly 2-3 months has been revolting, and something that has personally impacted me and a lot of people in our own communities. So what I will say is that I'm really glad that we were able to sit here and have this conversation and really open up some of the different ideas that are being floated around. So to you, what would you give us your name?
Hi, yeah, I'm Ruben.
Ruben?
My question's to Bo and Selwyn, and it's more around what the next generation is going to look like, and what they think it would look like in like 20, 30 years. And the reason I'm going to ask this question is because I grew up in the UK under Thatcher and John Major, and we all know what the so I lots of racism, and I experienced to Bo, and none of us thought that one day we'd have a brown prime minister in the UK, right? So this is what I'm asking is, what do you think? Because whatever we vote in October is going to affect the next generation. So what do they think it looks like?
Okay.
One thing that we've learned through this process, and it's not just the referendum process, but it's through a whole range of social movements that have occurred over the last 10 years, is that a lot of them have been led by young people. So young people want social change, and young people are at the forefront of social change. And that's really exciting. As a father of 2 girls and a grandfather, it's great because you can see that those young people are wanting to be socially active and to focus on championing issues that are close to their heart. And when they do that, you see them mobilise in huge numbers. Happens right across the country, which is fantastic. What we've seen also as part of this referendum process is that the number of young voters has increased significantly, because the electoral roll closed on Monday, but we've had lots of young people who are obviously first-time voters that have got on the electoral roll because they want to be involved in social issues. So it's significant to see these sorts of things that are happening. And Bo talked about many of the things that have gone on in the past, in the sense of saying, we've had, why Aboriginal Torres Strait people, our advocacy, our approach, and the work that we've done in communities right across the country has actually been about how do we create systems for ourselves. Aboriginal medical services are probably the most, shining light and example of where we've seen the need for structural change. And that's essentially what we're talking about here. What we have is created structural change in the sense of creating our own medical services, creating our own schools, creating our own legal services, even though that's been dismantled a little bit. We're creating, Indigenous communities have created these things in spite of what government services have provided for them. They've done that because they can deliver those services and know how to do those things better. But what we don't have is then we have structural impediments to ensure that the success that comes from those is actually fed up to a national construct to enable that sharing to happen right across the country. And then to have someone sitting at the table advocating to politicians and to the government of the day to say, okay, we've seen pockets of success. We see the stuff that happens in South East Queensland. We've seen the stuff that happens in Yarrabah. We see the stuff that happens in Arnhem Land. Let's work out how we get those stories from community of success to then feed that into this national conversation about creating fundamental structural change.
Thank you, Selwyn. Bo, would you like to reflect on that?
Can you repeat that again?
Ruben, is it Ruben?
Yeah.
Do you mind repeating that question, if that's okay?
It's a really good question, because we've seen a lot, and especially in the places that, I associate. We see a lot of young black fellas, understanding what is happening, which is amazing. and really having a fair crack at sort of wanting to change that or be a part of some things that create change. I remember, one of the first rallies I was a part of organizing, or actually, I didn't even organize it. Like, we came into Brisbane. I grew up here in Brisbane, always came to community events, but this one particular event was Invasion Day 2012, and it was led by white fellas. And there was, a lot of the mob, they went down to Canberra for the 40th anniversary. And for some mob, it like upsetted, a few of us, because, mob should be leading these things, especially on this day. And I can tell you now, all around this country, the 26th January is being led by young black fellas and old fellas as well. Our old fellas are next to us always in the room organising, always in the room, giving us knowledge or pulling us up if need be. And so you look on social media as well, there's a lot of young people that want change, and they're hungry for the knowledge, but they just got to be, patient about the experiences that they've got to have to understand, what has happened before them as well. And I'd like to be optimistic and say the future is good. And I don't want to be all doom and gloom and, this is racist and that is racist, because a lot of it is. But, I've got 2 kids, and I don't want them to grow up in a world where, they're, looked upon like I am, or my siblings, or one day be forced to, live on a mission like my parents did, or a reserve, which is something serious as well. And, I don't want my kids to be part of a system that doesn't acknowledge who they are for what they are and from where they come from. And I think, for me, this whole process leaves that out. Australia is a settler colony, just like the UK, just like America, just like New Zealand, and it's ruled by power and those in power, like many countries. And sadly, we make up a small portion of people in this country, but it doesn't mean that we're less valued or as powerful. The last 50 years has shown how much we've changed our perception and reality in this country by, creating organizations that have influence just not on our community, but many communities in this country and around the world. I do hope that things change, but, I don't want to put my hand in hope, especially that hand in other people's favour, because especially those who don't experience what we experience as blackfellas, that's a big red flag for me. I don't know. What I do know about what's going to happen to the next generation is they're going to be advocating against land destruction, deaths in custody, forced removal of children. All these things are continuing to happen at a high rate. That's what's going to be happening, and that's what we're preparing for as well. And you can't not deny the fact that that's going to happen.
Thank you, Bo. And I want to say thank you to everyone who participated today, everyone who had a question to ask. We're going to continue out in the area just out here in the front of the lifts. But I just want to say a huge thank you to Bo Spearham, David O'Brien, Jess Connellan, and Selwyn Button. Everyone, please give them a round of applause. All of you have volunteered your time the last hour and a half, and just a reminder to to take a photo of the Menti QR code and to answer that, and that'll go up on LinkedIn tonight or tomorrow. I just want to close by saying that it's been a really interesting debate tonight. I think a number of things have been raised and said that I hope that people can take away and be able to reflect on some of the things that that some of the panelists have said here today. I think when I think about the referendum and the voice to Parliament, obviously I am neutral in the whole debate. However, what I do say is what's really important to me, I think, is that this is an opportunity for all Australians to hold a mirror up to their face and to ask themselves what they think and what they think Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, how we should be positioned as far as the parliament is concerned. So this is a question that if you're comfortable with saying yes, then vote yes. If not, vote no. But I hope that today this discussion has raised some issues and some topics that you guys can take away and continue the conversation with. So can we just give one more big round of applause to our participants? And thank you all for coming and joining today. Just before you guys leave, if you've got a parking ticket that needs to be dealt with, you can pop over here to Katie in the pink skirt, and she will have she will take care of you. Thank you.